American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues. My, oh my.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
It's the FSS Plus podcast with Joe Doyle. I'm Jason Churchill. Joe, right here at the top, baseball is supposed to be fun, is it not? Am I wrong about baseball? Baseball's supposed to be fun. I have a theory here I'm going to throw at you right out of the gate at the top of the show. But yes or no, baseball's supposed to be fun, right?
I mean, that's the lie that I was told. I got into this.
You're thinking
I got into
it.
this industry loving the game, and I was told it's fun. What about you? You seem to have stuck around for a while. You were told that this was fun.
Yeah, I think baseball is fun. Here's the theory I have. The more it matters, the less fun the fans seem to have. When you think about,
well, you're just pulling this right out of Spider-Man.
No, what I'm saying here,
power.
a little bit, yeah. But what I'm saying here is, Major League Baseball fans are either elated or they hate the world. Their team either sucks or their team is amazing. There's no in between, and for either one of those, there's no in between. You go down to the college level, and you get a chance to look at teams in the regionals and the super regionals, like teams that were eliminated early. Those fan bases, even in the South, even in the SEC, ACC, even where baseball is king, those fan bases are not losing their minds in disappointment. They're not losing their gourds in frustration. Now, I'm not saying they're happy their team is out. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, their reaction to their team being knocked out isn't anywhere near what it is in Major League Baseball. I'm saying the more it matters, the bigger it is, the bigger discrepancy, I think, in what percentage of fans are actually loving this. It's just an observation. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just an observation. And I think it's kind of funny to me. It's disappointing in a way, but it's kind of funny to me how few fans in Major League Baseball are actually having fun watching their team. Like, your team either has to be on its way to a 100-win season in a World Series, or at least have a really good chance at it, or your fan base hates you and is tired of you and is done and is complaining every day. And, obviously Seattle's where I'm seeing this the most, but I see this in San Diego. I'm seeing this in Philadelphia right now, Joe. Like, Philly, not the start they expected. St. Louis, not the start they expected. The Cubs fans have had it. They're about ready to trade the Cubs for the White Sox. That's how bad they make it sound. That's absolutely how bad they make it sound. It's absolutely crazy. But you don't see that in college. It's just maybe more loyalty in college. I don't know what it is.
Who's the most feverish fan base? Like, the most unfair weather fans out there
in Major League Baseball?
Yeah.
I would say
what they all have in common.
I would say it's the Cardinals.
Okay, the Cardinals, I will agree with you. I think the Cardinals have top 3 fans. But they're also always good. They're always competitive. They always
lifetime,
develop talent.
In your lifetime,
yeah. Well, that's a long time. I mean, I can almost drive.
It's 20 plus years. Yeah, you're right. It's 20 plus years. But you go back to the 90s, and it was not like that. And Cardinals fans just kind of like, cool, ho hum. I still love the Cardinals.
Let's go over the last 10 years. I would say the Orioles fan base is, committed. I would say the Royals fan base, while I'm talking about the fan bases that are the most quote unquote online. Sure. The Royals fan base, committed, and Seattle. I would say that those 3 fan bases are just very public. They're very present in the game. Mm-hmm. I think all 3 of those teams embrace prospects. They embrace the development. They embrace the grind. They've never been blessed with the huge payrolls, or not recently. And so I think those teams, when they are competitive and they feel as though their window is creaked open, the expectations get blown through the roof because
100%.
you've just never been there, right? Like, hey, I've been dragged through the mud. We've been there with you through thick and thin. We watched, name your prospect. We've been waiting for this guy for 5 years, and now he's here. Why aren't we good? And I think that kind of contributes into the type of narrative that you're saying. I agree.
And I think in Major League Baseball, things take so much time. And I don't mean the games or the innings or at bats. I'm not talking about the clock or anything like that. Things take time. When a team struggles, it takes time for them to figure it out. It's not just the next week you made an adjustment with your defense and now things are better like the NFL. It just doesn't work that way. It takes weeks and sometimes months to really get where that team should actually be. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is if you're the Padres or you're the Diamondbacks or the Giants, or like, you have to consider things like, I think about the Astros a lot, Joe. The Astros, they lost 100 games 3 years in a row. I think that was 2011 through 2013. Then they went 70-92. So they were 19 games better and still only won 70 games. The very next year, they went to the division series with 86 wins. And it looked like here we are, 2015 going into 2016. We're ready to take a huge step forward. And you know what happened? The Houston Astros took a step backward and won 84 games, 11 games out, and missed the playoffs. You know what happened the year after that? They won the World Series. And we know what's happened every year after that. They've been in the LCS or the World Series every year since 2017. So sometimes things just don't happen.
Alluding to here.
No, just any fan base who's like, all right, like Toronto, they are out of their minds right now about that team. They're out of their minds. They're absolutely,
for good reason. I mean, that you can see the sand dial ticking down with Bichette and Biggio. I know Biggio hasn't performed, but Bichette and Biggio and Vlad and some of these contracts coming to an end, like for good reason. Let me throw you another question. Do you think the acceleration of social media and this like instant gratification culture that has been built up over the last 10 years has to do with this? Because I look back and I know it's easy for me to quote Seattle because I've lived here my whole life, but I look back at like when Seattle acquired, Franklin Gutierrez and, just that package of prospects.
Right.
Back then it was, these guys are all, for the cultural sense, they're all slapdick guys, right? We're trading top talent for prospects. Prospects never turn into anything. Well, back then that wouldn't have meant anything. It wouldn't have moved the needle. But today, the public knows those prospects so intimately before they arrive, and expectations are placed on those prospects so intimately before they arrive that it's almost like you receive a kid that's in high A and it's like, okay, when's he going to be here? We've been promised greatness. When's he going to be here? That didn't used to exist.
And when it doesn't work, again, it's kind of a football culture in baseball fandom. Okay, so if it doesn't work, you fire the head coach and the GM, right? Because sometimes in 2 years in the NFL, occasionally even less time than that, the coach or the GM gets fired. Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona probably got too much time. It's in baseball, you just can't do that after 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 games, or even a disappointing season. Like if the Toronto Blue Jays go out and have a disappointing 2023, are you firing the manager and the general manager? I'm not. Like, not necessarily. There'd have to be something else going on. Like, I just didn't believe that guy was capable of taking this team to the next level. Just because he didn't this year, it makes me dig a little more. But I'm not firing that guy. And I think that's what fans want. Fans want huge payrolls, constant change, constant action, constant activity that tells them they care, they're paying attention, they listen. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way in baseball and shouldn't work that way in baseball. So, yeah. I just think
trade for Aaron Rodgers. There is no Aaron Rodgers in baseball.
There's no Aaron Rodgers in baseball.
The Jets are saved.
That's very, very true. The Jets are saved with one trade. Well, theoretically speaking, you're not doing that with any baseball team. If your baseball team is mediocre to bad right now, there's no one trade that fixes it. There's no one player. You could put Aaron Judge on the Philadelphia Phillies. Does that fix their season? No. Aaron Nola has to turn it up a notch.
Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler. If you sent both of them, Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler, to the Chicago Cubs, are they winning their division?
Are the Cubs winning that division?
Maybe the conversation.
I don't know.
I still think the Brewers win that division.
Yeah. I mean, they've dug
And they're
themselves a
supposed
little too much of a
the
hole.
Cubs are supposed to be close. Baseball is, man, like when people talk about roster building, it really is about building an entire cog. It's not about just,
It's also
Aaron Judge or
constant.
Trey Turner.
I'm glad you brought this up, Joe. This is a really good point. It's also constant. Building a roster isn't like this action that takes place during a specific range of the calendar year and then you're done. It is every single day because things happen. Injuries happen. Players don't play like you expect them to. Sometimes players play significantly better than you expect them to. It is a constant thing. It is a 26-man, a 40-man roster in baseball. It is a living, breathing creature that you have to continue to feed. And sometimes it's just make sure he gets enough food and water. Sometimes it's, wow, we need to take him to the doctor. So he needs medication. Like sometimes you need a fix. There are teams out there that need fixes, that things just aren't working. There are teams out there where you just give them water. Just give them water, watch it grow. And that's what we thought that the Blue Jays were going to be in 2023. That's what we thought Seattle was going to be in 2023. That's what we thought the Orioles would be in 2023, and they have been. That's what the Rays seemingly always, constantly, and consistently are. It's just, I don't know. I guess the word is it's not as predictable as other sports. And I really think the football culture in fans takes over. And I think that might be that, and the social media aspect that you brought up might be the biggest difference between college baseball fans and Major League Baseball fans. I would even venture to guess, Joe, that fans of South Carolina baseball, for example, that are huge fans of South Carolina baseball are probably, I don't know, Orioles fans or Braves fans or something like that too. But I bet they deal with their fandom differently with South Carolina, with USC, with the Gamecocks, that program, than they do the Braves or the Orioles. I bet they handle it completely differently, which is fascinating to me. Now I want to get a South Carolina Gamecocks fan on here that's also like a Braves fan or something.
We should wrap this little segment up by saying, man, sports in general have changed so much.
Yeah.
College athletics are a shattered mirror of what they used to be. The PGA Tour
still
is
very,
now,
very entertaining, but yes, it has changed. It is
the
absolutely
PGA
changed.
Tour is now at least fractionally governed by an international body.
Oof.
Major League Baseball is now like an entire life cycle from high school through the big leagues with expectations set on seemingly every 7th round pick from the time they're a teenager. I mean, it's just like, it's crazy, man. Sports in general are just, bowling is the same, I think.
Bowling, curling, one of the most underrated.
Curling is the same. I heard ice is melting though, so
it is.
Can't run out of that.
And that means we use more energy to keep the curling surface in great shape, which is also sad. So maybe I shouldn't be pushing curling on people. All right, here's what we're gonna do today. MLB draft. We're gonna talk MLB draft. We're gonna dive into the catcher market. So every week before we go live, I either throw some stuff at Joe that I'm thinking about, and he goes, "Yeah, let's do this," and then let's add this. Or today, I just went, "What are you thinking about? What's going on in your head right now?" And he said he's thinking about high school catchers. High school catchers are a very interesting demographic in the Major League Baseball draft. So we're going to dive into that and how it pertains to some recent draft picks and prospects and a current one or two. But I want to start off the show talking about the Miami Marlins, Joe, if we could, to go back to Major League Baseball just for a few minutes here. The Marlins are fascinating to me because when you watch this team and then you look at the numbers, there's really nothing they do that's amazing. They're not elite at anything. In fact, if you're a run differential fan, which I'm not, they're minus 24. And they're 7 games over 500. Yeah, you look at they're 7 games over 500, they're minus 24. You look at a team like I don't know, Boston's 7 runs over, they're plus 7 and they're 500. The Cleveland Guardians are 28-33 and they're minus 29. So essentially the same as Miami, but there's a 5-game difference. It's crazy how baseball works, but I think that Miami team is in a really interesting spot. They're in second place in the National League East. They are only 3 games back of the Atlanta Braves in the division, and they have a 2-game wild card lead. 2 games right now in the National League. It's the Dodgers, Miami, and Pittsburgh. You get the Giants a half game back, the Mets 2.5 back, Philadelphia 3 back, but Miami is 2.5, 4.5, and 5 ahead of those 3 teams. San Diego is 5.5 behind Miami. As we sit here 60 plus games into the season, 63 for Miami, they're in really good shape. And I think if you ask that ball club, they'd be like, yeah, this is about where we expect it to be. This is absolutely where we expect it to be. I think the question now, if you're a Marlins fan, if you're a baseball fan, what happens now? What does Kim Ng and that ball club, that front office do when the trade deadline comes? Like what is there for them to? We know they have talent. We know that's the way it works. We know Miami's the arms galore. They traded Pablo Lopez because they had like another 12 high-end arms in the minors that were within a year of the big leagues, so they could get Luis Ariz, who's hitting 400, by the way. But when you look at that Marlins club, the one thing they don't do is spend money. And I just wonder how creative Kim Ng and her staff is going to be in turning the lack of payroll flexibility into adding impact at the trade deadline. I'm not saying just this season, but this is really, it appears, going to be her first opportunity to buy at the deadline, with this current season being the whole point. I mean, they've spent 134 million, which is one of the lowest payrolls in baseball. That's their luxury tax number. Their cash out is barely over 100 million, but they have talent. How aggressive? Like I'm going to put you in Kim Ng's shoes. Okay. I'm going to put, you're going to be walking around and I don't know if she wears your size, so this might be a little tight. Be careful. But I'm going to put you in her office just for a second. If I told you had a 2-game lead for the number 2 wild card, you were 3 games up on the next closest team at the All-Star break, how aggressive is Miami Marlins general manager Joe Doyle this season, considering how young that roster is, considering the lack of payroll flexibility you have, not just this year, but even moving forward? We don't know anything about what might change there in Miami, if ever, in terms of payroll. What do you do?
Yeah, I'm not buying like crazy. I think you kind of undersold how lucky this team has been. I mean,
the run differential. I think the run differential does tell you a little something, right?
I mean, their Pythagorean on Baseball Reference is 29 and 34. They're outpacing what they should be by 12 games.
But I just gave you. We just fast forwarded 30 games, and they're still in the position they are. So are you sitting there thinking?
Well, I mean, if that's the case,
we have a 3-game lead, like we've been lucky, so maybe I'm not going to be as aggressive. Is that kind of how you do it?
So I look at it like this: like the Marlins are going to be a team that nobody wants to run into in October. They've got Jesus Luzardo, who's been money. They've got Sandy Alcantara, who has been very good, but somehow a shell of what he was. Edward Cabrera looks like he looks like a real dude. So you don't want to run into these guys in October, but at the same time, it's like, I think 30 games from now, you kind of have to take stock of what the rest of the league looks like. If you're still in this position, but you're tied with the Mets, or the Phillies are roaring and they're right there, and you're still kind of skating, it's hard for me. I look at it like this: the Marlins are so confusing for me. They've been incredibly lucky, and I'm not sure there is a farm system in baseball that is performing worse than the Miami Marlins. They have,
this is true.
They have next to nothing performing. Jacob Amaya has been good. He's at AAA. He'll probably be up soon. Xavier Edwards has gotten a cup of coffee. I'm sure that he's going to be up for an extended look here. He's been like 370 across Major League Baseball and AAA this year. But besides that, with the exception of Yuri Perez, he's been pretty awesome. Everyone has been terrible.
Yeah, Max Meyer hasn't even pitched. Jacob Berry's sitting under 200.
Jake Eater's been hurt. Dex Fulton's working his way back. Like, Sixto Sanchez hasn't thrown a baseball in 3 years. Like, I struggle to look at this team, and I struggle to look at their farm, and I go, if you're going to move pieces for significant value, who are you going to move? Like, what are teams going to want that isn't at the top of your farm system? I look at what the Mariners did in 2021. 2021, Seattle was greatly outpacing their record. They were
They were the
ahead of
Marlins.
where they
They were the
probably should
Marlins.
have been.
Absolutely.
They were the Marlins. And what did they do? They moved a reliever in Kendall Graveman that was not controllable. And they went and got Abraham Toro and they brought in Tyler Anderson to just kind of grab innings for a team that was running out of pitching. But more importantly, I think that the thing that they did that kind of moved the needle for 2022 was they brought in Diego Castillo. Castillo was getting expensive. The Rays were, they didn't want to pay him, and he kind of filled a leverage role for the team in 2022. I think that's what the Marlins have to do. I think they need to go and they need to make more moves that improve the bullpen for 2024, get controllable, young, talented arms, and maybe do more of the same with like what they did with the Joey Wendell move. And, I think Luis Arias was a bigger splash than what they need to do, but improve on the margins, improve your chances to win more one-run games moving forward, which is incredible considering they're winning 80% of them right now. But I think that's kind of the key to success for 2024. Spend a little bit this offseason, hope that your pitching takes another step forward. And I just can't see this as a sustainable contender. But I'll finish with this. This is a little bit long-winded. If the Mets and the Phillies are where they are today, 30 days from now, then I think you do have to kind of go.
Because then two teams would kind of sort of be out of your way a little bit. Like you're kind of expecting, because Miami's been a little lucky and things are a little bit weird in the National League with them right now, that the chances of Miami holding the lead they have now probably aren't great. I'm with you there. I think Philly's going to play well enough to avoid going into seller mode. I know a lot of folks are out there thinking, oh, they could trade Aaron Nola. I mean, it's possible, but I don't see them trading anybody else, even if they're not contending. Really, I don't think the Phillies are calling this off. I think the Phillies are making moves to win now at that club. But Miami, yeah, they're a tough one. It is tough because you're right. They don't have a bunch of guys trending in the right direction in their farm system. They've already traded from their strength of arms. Some of their arms, you mentioned Sanchez, I mentioned Max Meyer, have injuries that have kept them out. There's a couple other guys that are dealing with injuries as well. One of their top lefties has made one start all season. I think Dax Fulton has made a handful of starts, but hasn't been very good. They just don't have guys that teams are going to be knocking down the door to get. So impact might be a little difficult to get. And that's why I brought up payroll, Joe, because another way to get impact is to take on a salary. And Miami's just never been that team. They're just like, oh, could they go get Cody Bellinger? No, that doesn't make any sense for a team like Miami. He's making some money. He's probably going to be a free agent at the end of the year with his opt out. Miami would be renting a player. Does that sound like anything the Marlins would ever do? Basically, in the modern existence of that franchise, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. But I do think they're going to do some things, because I think this is it. Like, we don't know where they're going to be next year, and they are in one of those divisions that theoretically should be more like the American League East this year. That National League East. The Mets haven't played as well as we expected them to. We expect them to be good year to year. We expect the Phillies, at least for now, to be good year to year. The Braves are set up for the long haul. Miami's not going to have a lot of these opportunities. So that's why I'm kind of thinking, I think she's going to do something. I think they're going to make a couple of moves and try to augment that team. I just don't think it's going to be major, and I think they're a little bit limited. So interesting. It's a good point about you brought up the Pythag on them, which includes things like run differential and schedule and things of that nature. But sometimes you just can't argue with a team getting it going. I mean, you made the very apt comparison. Seattle in 2021, everybody was talking about the run differential. Yeah, but their run differential is minus 43. So they actually suck and have been incredibly lucky, except their luck didn't run out before the season. They won 90 games that year. They didn't get into the postseason, but they kept winning at the same pace all year long, despite the fact that their run differential was low. So one of those really interesting. I'm not a big run differential guy. I don't like staring at that. But I would understand why people would look at that and say, maybe, just maybe, it's kind of like batting average on balls in play. Not a big fan, but sometimes it can tell you to look deeper at some things. I'm fascinated by what the Marlins are doing and the direction of that club, and kind of speeding it up a little bit in my head. Might this be a year, and a unique year, because Kim Ng doesn't know how many opportunities she's going to get like this. don't you have to kind of, at least in a very small way, sort of go for it? That's just kind of what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, totally agree. I think you're right when you say, the Phillies and the Mets and those teams have way bigger payrolls. Like they're always going to feast year in and year out with the talent that they've got. So this is an opportunity for the Marlins to splash and make the playoffs. They surprised a lot of people in 2020 when they made the playoffs with a young roster. Granted, it was a 60-game season, but they went for it in that regard. Maybe this is another opportunity for them to do it. But at the same time, if you're a team like the Marlins that doesn't intend on spending, you can't tear down the farm system to make a splash in 1 year.
Find a way to, I don't know, maybe they make a sideways move. They have a guy like Jorge Soler, who's having a good year. He's 240, 330, 525 with 17 homers. He's running a 129 WRC plus right now. He's 31 years old. The strikeout rates are very reasonable at 25.6%. His contract, he can opt out at the end of the season. If he continues to have the year he's having, he's probably going to. If you're Miami, might you try to do something with that player and that contract, similarly to what the Blue Jays did over the winter with Teoscar Hernandez? He only had 1 year left. They turned him into a cheaper piece and a piece they could use out of the bullpen. I'm not saying that makes the Marlins better, specifically getting a bullpen piece that you control for 2 or 3 years, but I can see a sideways trade deadline, even if, a Soler for a reliever deal isn't exactly sideways, but I could see that. And it would be feeding one of the most shallow areas of that club. And that's that bullpen that you mentioned. So I would keep an eye on Jorge Soler, even though they're winning. You just never know. You have to be creative. That might be one way to do it. All right, let's talk draft, Joe, because by my math, Mr. Doyle, we're about a month out. As we sit here and record this, I believe we are 31 days away from day one of the 2023 MLB draft. And one of the more interesting things, one of the more interesting demographics, the more difficult to project, I would even say, is high school catchers. And a lot of times what happens is you get a guy, hey, this guy might be a top 10 pick. And then all of a sudden the draft gets closer. And what happens to those players, Joe? We've seen it time and time again. It seems to happen just about every year. We hear about a prep catcher possibly being a top 5 or 10 pick. What happens to those guys as the draft gets closer?
Well, I mean, they tumble. It's the riskiest outside of right-handed high school pitching because of the injury concerns. It's the most volatile demographic there is. These guys take 5 years to get to the big leagues. A lot of times you see these guys, for lack of a better word, flounder in A-ball for 3 years. So because of that, they get pushed down the board a little bit in favor of, college bats that might be at the big league level in 2 years and, fit a more aggressive competitive window. But I think we're seeing some young catchers right now in baseball that might buck that trend. And this draft class has an especially talented catcher that I think could buck that trend as well.
Yeah, tell us about it. I believe you're talking about Blake Mitchell from Sinton. Tell us about Blake Mitchell. What kind of an athlete is he? Is he bat first? What are the projections on Blake Mitchell in terms of the player and in terms of round one of this draft? It does seem like, as much as somebody like you or me can say, it does seem like he's a consensus top 25, top 30 player. That doesn't necessarily guarantee he's going to go in round one, but that does seem to be where most people have Blake Mitchell.
Yeah, I think when you talk about high school catchers, there's always a but, right? There's always a, well, they don't do that. Like Tyler Soderstrom, 60 hit, 60 power. You say that and you're like, geez, this guy did, that deserves to be a top 10 pick. But, he might end up at first base. It's a big body. It's not the most athletic. Harry Ford, I think, is another example. Harry Ford was actually drafted where he was drafted, I think 11th overall, because he was such an insane athlete. And there were so many ways to get him on the field, even if it doesn't work behind the plate. But, Drew Romo's a guy that fell, didn't know if he could hit. There's a number of guys that just kind of fall down boards for different reasons. Blake Mitchell is as physical an athlete behind the plate as I've seen in the 6 years that I've been doing this. He can do it all. I mean, he's up to 98 on the mound, and every bit of that arm strength plays behind the plate. He's had pop times that are on video that are sub 185, which is crazy. It's absolutely crazy for a high school kid. It wasn't a pitch out. It was a 185. Left-handed power plus power projection, probably only an average hit tool. But still, I mean, if you're talking about a guy that has a chance to hit 265, 270 at the big league level with 25 home runs and, have one of the top 2 or 3 best arms in the league.
That's a great
At some point, you just kind of say, at some point, you just have to say, and he's been a dude since he was in like 9th grade. So a lot of scouts think, if there was a catcher that was going to move quick and has kind of handled a staff before and has played at, whatever it is, 7A in Texas, like the highest league, it's probably Blake Mitchell. So he's probably going to be another one of these guys like Harry Ford that goes in the top 15 and sticks behind the plate.
Kind of an athlete,
very rare, Jason.
Kind of an athlete is he? Like if we were just to play devil's advocate here and say Blake Mitchell not a catcher, even though the consensus seems to be he's got a great shot to do that. What are we talking about here? We're talking about a guy who can run, and there's plenty of agility, lateral agility, obviously plenty of arm to play anywhere else on the field. But if you had to put him at another position, does that start to worry you? Does that drop him out of the top 100 if I say definitely not a catcher and you had to believe me? If we do that and we remove catcher from it, how far does he fall?
I don't think he falls that far. I mean, Tyler Soderstrom had that. If you think he's going to move off catcher, Tyler Soderstrom from 2020, I think, with Oakland is probably the perfect example. He went, I want to say like 21st, when a lot of people thought he was going to go 10 to 15 to the White Sox, to some of those teams. So, yeah, I don't think he falls that far. Ultimately, I think if you go back to like last June 2022, there were like just some initial discussions like, what does this look like if it doesn't stay behind the plate? It's probably third base. The arm strength clearly plays at any position. He moves well. It's a projectable body. He's not overgrowing his frame yet. So, yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a left-handed hitting third baseman with plus power and defensive chops, that certainly plays all over the first round.
The handedness makes a little bit of a difference here.
Definitely.
I wouldn't say it's a dictating difference, but that does make a difference here. And the fact that you said maybe it's third base instead of going directly to first base, that to me is the biggest difference. Like if you're telling me Blake Mitchell's not a catcher, but the first move probably to third base and the next move is probably to right field, and I don't hear first base in those first two thoughts, I'm feeling a lot better about the athlete. And you mentioned Harry Ford, great athlete. Maybe he can end up playing third. Maybe he could play left. There's even people that have thought about second base or center field for Harry Ford. That does make a big difference in your confidence because these are risks. Everything you do here is a risk. I'm big on that. Every trade you make, every DFA, every roster move, it's a wager. You're making a bet. The draft is also making a bet. If you're making a bet, probability, risk, things like that certainly come into play. Athleticism. Going to do Blake Mitchell well here. Who's next on that list? When you look at it's not a real strong class, at least near the top with prep catchers, but there's a couple more in the top. I don't know, 50 to 100, 50 to 150 range, I believe. Who's next on that list? Are we talking about the Huntington Beach kid?
Yeah, it's light, man. I mean, you're talking about Ralphie Velasquez next. Most scouts that I've talked to, and we've going back to my actual live looks days, most people don't think that he has a shot at catching. He's almost certainly a first baseman. And like, this is what we're talking about. Like, people throw the same sorts of great, like people call it a plus hit tool with potential for above average power with Ralphie. And instead of being talked about in the top 20, again, physical left-handed bat, we're talking about a kid that's probably going to go closer to the 30 to 50 range. So the position makes a huge difference. But again, he's not even as good as an athlete as Tyler Soderstrom, and Soderstrom moved out from behind the plate within months of being drafted. So the other one is a really interesting guy. We can talk about these two in a minute if you want. Zion Rose out of IMG Academy. He's a Chicago, Illinois native. He's a really polarizing player because like his athletic testing is off the charts. He can run, like he's a plus runner. In a lot of ways, he is kind of like Harry Ford in that he's a really good runner, really big bat speed, but just really not a refined product behind the plate. There's been some below average arm strength concerns thrown on him, and people think that he might move to center field.
Mm.
So, and he's already 6'1", 215 pounds, so he doesn't have a whole lot of projection left. He's being talked about as like a third rounder, fourth rounder, fifth rounder. So it's a polarizing position. I mean, I don't know, man. It's Tryon Rose is a tough one.
It doesn't sound like there's really more than a small handful of guys that are going to go in the top 5 or 6 rounds that have a even 10 or 20% shot to catch long term from the prep level. So I want to flip this a little bit. What's the catcher crop like overall? Let's include the college guys here. If you want to draft best player available, but when you get down into some of the when you get to day 2, late day 2, especially day 3, sometimes the tiebreaker is, hey, what's our organizational strength? What do we have at this position? What do we have, player wise with this skill set, with this kind of power, lefty, righty? Can he play center? Is he a catcher? Is he a shortstop? Is he a left-hander? Like whatever that might be. Sometimes those kinds of things are the tiebreakers. So if you're a club that's short on catching, which, I don't know, Joe, let me see. 30 teams in baseball are short on catching. That is the honest to goodness truth too. 30 teams in Major League Baseball do not have enough catching. It is extremely difficult to find. And the fact that the prep kids are so polarizing and difficult to project send me right to the college ranks. What does that class look like at the catcher position in college? I think we know who number 1 is, but after that, is there another guy after the Virginia kid, or like do we have to go down?
Marks, man. The reason you don't hear about these guys is because so few can catch. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of these guys are very marginal catchers, and they play because they have a strong arm and they can hit a little bit. Like there's just not very many college catchers that project to catch. So many catchers at the big league level are converted outfielders or converted pitchers, or they come from the international ranks. Like it takes a special athlete and frankly a special person to be able to handle that role 115 times over the course of the season. Kyle Teal might be that. I mean, he's wiry, he's athletic, he's explosive, he gets low in the crouch, he's got a strong arm. Like that kid out of Virginia is probably going to be a top 10 pick because he's such a unicorn. Once you get past Kyle Teal, I mean, I think Michael Carrico out of Davidson is probably going to go in the top 4 or 5 rounds, but he broke his wrist this year. So, there's some doubts on the bat, and the bat was going to be his biggest selling point. As I go down my list, the more guys that I read, the more people that I see here. Devin Burks out of Kentucky, Garrett Guillemette out of Texas, Julian Brock out of Louisiana. Like, these guys are all bats. These guys are not catchers. Like, I think the guy that's lowest on my list that I think goes a lot earlier than I probably have him here, he's ranked number 315 right now. Connor Burns out of Long Beach State. He's probably a better defensive catcher than Kyle Teal. And even though I have him as like a 10th rounder, I bet he goes in the 5th because the dude is definitely going to catch. And there is inherent value in even being a platoon catcher at the big league level who can handle either righties or lefties with the bat. So yeah, man, it's a really short list of guys that teams actually think will provide value back there.
What about Devin Burks from Kentucky? Are we talking about a day 3 kid, or does he have a chance to sneak into day 2? Just because it sounds like he's definitely a catcher.
He's a catcher. I mean, he's got big power. He kind of reminds me of Hunter Goodman from Memphis from a couple of years ago. And all that guy's done is mash baseballs in Colorado's system. So I think Burks is a guy that goes in the first 5-6 rounds. Julian Brock probably in the first 5 or 6 rounds. Calvin Harris out of Ole Miss, the DJ. Not funny. Calvin Harris out of Ole Miss is a pretty good catcher with a little bit of a stick. He probably goes on day 2. But yeah, a lot of these guys that don't project to stay behind the plate will just end up like, Jack Payton at Louisville. Who's the kid? Jack Bolger at Vanderbilt, Corey Collins at Georgia. They just end up going on day 3 because it's like, well, maybe this kid can catch, maybe he can hit a little bit. And if that's
even getting a number 2 catcher, even getting a number 2 catcher out of like a 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th round pick, you're jumping for joy at this point.
That's fantastic value. But like, if you have questions about them being a catcher, why not take a lefty that throws 94? You know, that's what teams run into. Once you get into that 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round, it's like, okay, is there a catcher here that we think can catch, or is there a interesting righty out of Wingate that we think we could turn into something? Like, that's usually what teams are battling with, and that's why you see, like, 75 or 80% of the picks on the second half of day 2 end up being arms.
What? Let's finish up here. What is the strength of this draft? Let's kill your top, whatever your top 30 or so looks like right now. What's the strength of this draft after the top 30? Because a lot of times the last 4 or 5 years it's college pitching. That's not necessarily the case this year, is it?
No, it's college bats. This is a good year for college bats. It's one of the better years I can remember for college bats. I do think the top 50 picks in this class are pretty strong. College outfielders, especially with Dylan Cruz and Wyatt Langford at the top. But, like, you look at some of these guys that are bat over pretty much everything, like Tommy Troy and Matt Shaw, and even Chase Davis to a certain degree. Like, he's probably not going to be much more than fringy in a corner. Like, there's a lot of guys that can really, really hit in this class. And I think for that reason, it's going to be pretty college bat heavy in the first round. And once you get past that, there's some really interesting high school infielders. Those would probably be the 2 demographics that I think look the best. I would kick it back to you because I want to know your opinion. Is there a specific demographic that you think best represents the health of a draft class? Because I think I've heard 5 or 6 different answers from 5 or 6 different types of people.
Yeah, for me, it's the strength of this draft, what you just said. When there are college hitters and there's depth at that particular spot, whether it's first baseman, third baseman, it doesn't matter. If you get college position players that project as potential everyday players, that's the most important thing you can get. Pitching, you can find. We have what we've seen over the last 10 years, Joe, you know this as well as anybody. We've seen players that go undrafted, or that are 23rd round picks or 16th round picks or 5th round picks turn into aces. We've seen this occur. Jacob deGrom was not a first round draft pick. And he's probably the best pitcher most people that were born in the last 30 years have ever seen, right? He's Pedro. He's Randy Johnson. He's legendary. Like, the injuries is the only thing that might end up keeping him from the Hall of Fame. That's how good he is. Not a guy who was drafted high. Like, we see this a lot. Guys taken in round 2 look like top 5 talents. Guys taken in round 5 end up being at the front of rotations. This happens a lot more with arms than it does with bats. So it probably depends on your club, but I think generally overall, I would imagine 20 clubs would say the same thing that we just did, that I just said. College bats is the thing you want. It's the easiest to project. The attrition rate in terms of injury is going to be lower than with college arms. That's the position teams are going to want to spend money on, whether it's a second baseman or a left fielder. It doesn't really matter. If I can find hitters in the draft, I'll find arms, no matter which team I am, no matter which ballpark I play in, even the Colorado Rockies. I will find pitching and figure out everything else. I need to find hitting in the draft. I learned that, I think, first, Joe, when you go back to the Chris Bryant draft, if you remember that. Wasn't all that long ago. Mm-hmm. It was 10 years ago. It's 2013. I was convinced the Cubs were taking John Gray out of Oklahoma. I was 100% convinced that's who they were taking. They scouted him so heavily, but they never actually considered him. Once we got to April, it was over. It was Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant was going to be their guy. And I was surprised by that. And I had some folks in the industry tell me, you shouldn't be surprised by this. Let me tell you why. And it was the conversation we just had. You want bat. You will figure out pitching. You'll figure that out. You'll find it. It's a risk you can take for $1 million 5 times every year to find the guy that you're probably finding at number 2 overall in the draft. Now, sometimes a guy, like Garrett Cole is available or Steven Strasburg is available. And there are some folks out there that think maybe Paul Skeens is the closest thing to that we've seen in a little while. And maybe that's true. But how many number 1 or number 2 starters are you finding after the top 5, after round 1 these days? A lot, like most of them. It's crazy. So I think you look back at it, I think that was the year Mark Appel was the first pick by the Houston Astros. Chris Bryant goes 2, John Gray goes 3 to the Rockies, Cole Stewart went 4 to the Twins, and then a bunch of bats, took over. Hunter Dozier was overdrafted that year, but it was because Kansas City would rather take a risk on a medium hitter than a pitcher like Phil Bickford, who ended up going 2 or 3 picks later, or Brady Shipley, or Chris Anderson. Yeah. So that draft taught me a ton about how teams look at the draft and where value is and probability and risk and things like that. I think the strength of this draft is if you're just about any team in the league, that's what you want it to be. That's what you want it to be. But now here's the thing. I'm real big, Joe, on every draft, no matter how good or bad the class is, no matter what the strengths of it are, is an opportunity for every organization in baseball, from the Reds and the Pirates and the Rays to the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Red Sox and all those teams that spend money, teams that don't spend. It is an opportunity, a very unique opportunity that happens 3 days a year for you to make up ground or put more ground between you and your competitors. You have to outdraft everybody. And I think you start with bats. I think you start with position players, and then you fill everything in. If you go pitching heavy, Los Angeles Angels, you'll end up regretting it, and they already are.
I think you can go pitching heavy once you get past the top 100 picks in every single draft. But I think that's what you're saying. And what you just said is exactly why I've continued to say, don't be surprised if Paul Skeens is there at 4 or 5. Don't be surprised if Chase Dollander is there at 12 or 13. And don't be surprised if Hurston Waldrop drops out of the top 25 picks. If you have the peace of mind of a guy that's going to hit, you can find Hurston Waldrop on the free agent market, like you said, for $2 million and sign him.
Because what is Waldrop's ceiling? Like a good 3? Is that his ceiling? It's like, is it
unless you're,
is it Eduardo Rodriguez? 2. Right? Like those guys are always around. Yeah, they're always around.
I think maybe it's Kevin Gausman, like maybe that's because it's a splitter curveball fastball profile.
But is he that good? Is he that good? Is he a 5 to 6 win starter? I think that's.
And I think to this is the conversation. Like Gausman was the number 3 pick in the draft,
and it took
him
very
different. And people were calling Gausman the best high school prospect. No, that's Bundy, but they were saying Gausman was one of the best pitching prospects they've ever seen.
There was some Kurt Schilling thrown out there with Kevin Gausman.
If there's question marks on the profile, just take the floor, don't draft the reliever in the first round when Kevin McGonigal's on the board.
Yeah, and don't bring injury into this at a 25 to 50% higher clip if you don't need to. I think that's another big thing here with pitching is the attrition rate. All right, the draft 1 month away, man. You know what I keep thinking about, Joe? How tired I am after the draft. Does that just tell you I'm getting older? Like I'm thinking about how tired I am, and I'm thinking about like I can't wait till day 3 is over. But at the same time, I'm like, can the draft just be tomorrow? Can the draft be? I don't mind the whole July thing. I don't mind. I'm not one of those that prefers it in June. I'm totally fine with them moving it back. And now it being part of like All-Star Week, and that's fine. Love it. It's great. I'll deal with it. Not an issue. But I'm like looking forward to day 1 and then looking forward to day 3 being over. Already 30 days out.
Day 3 is a long day. I'm one of those guys that, straps in, buckles up my seatbelt, and then goes to MLB.com and watches the tracker like a real sicko. There's nobody announcing any picks. Right. You're just reading font.
You're just reading. Yep. That's what I do. I do have something on. I turn the radio portion of it on MLB Radio Network and let that roll. But here's how I don't know how many people out there that listen are old enough to remember when the Major League Baseball draft was a freaking conference call. There was no television. There was no radio. It was a conference call. And I remember about 2004, 2005, when it finally got on the internet where you could click in and listen to the conference call. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, I will tell you that rest in peace, Tommy Lasorda was the superstar of those conference calls. Joe, I don't know if you've heard these stories, but Tommy Lasorda would come on those. He would always represent the Dodgers. whether he was the manager or just an ambassador for that franchise. He was always the guy on the conference call. And it would essentially, what it would be is like, all right, the Dodgers are now on the clock. And then the guy would come up and say, the Dodgers select, player ID number 555238, John Smith, right-hand pitcher, Utah State. And then they'd say Smith, Utah State. And then that would it. And then move on to the next team. Right. So, but Tommy Lasorda was too colorful to do that. He would come on and say, the greatest organization in sports, the Los Angeles Dodgers, select John Smith, right-hand pitcher, Utah, the beautiful state of Utah. He'd always have something colorful to add in there. And then like sometimes at the end, he'd say, God, you got to see the mountains in Utah. And it's like you're having a conversation with Tommy Lasorda. Everybody waited for the the Dodgers pick because it was Tommy Lasorda. I do miss the conference call days because of Tommy Lasorda, but man, how times have changed. It's televised. It's good for baseball. It's televised.
It's great for baseball. The event is great for baseball. Fans really galvanize around the event too.
More and more and more every year. I love it. And I understand it's not football. You're going to draft a guy at number 1 who's not going to play for you this year. And that's not the case in the NFL for the most part, unless it's the quarterback. Dylan Cruz probably not going to play for that. I can't guarantee that. Probably not going to play for the Pirates in 2023. But all bets are off for 2024. That's why we like Dylan Cruz so much.
You're not lying.
Really quick on the regionals, Joe, before we get out of here. The Super Regionals, it's all set this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Lots of really good matchups, of course. If you had to pick a College World Series winner at this point, as it's been pared down, who do you like? Because I got to tell you, I like the way Florida is playing right now. 48-15 on the year. I think they've won 11 of 14, including a sweep of top 10 Vanderbilt, 2 out of 3 versus top 25 Kentucky, a split with Vanderbilt in the SEC tourney after an 11-inning win over top 25 Alabama. They beat Texas Tech 3 times in 4 chances in the regionals heading into this weekend. And guess who they get? They get South Carolina. That Braves-Orioles / South Carolina fan is going to be watching Florida this weekend. I like Florida's chance. Without going chalk, I'm going Florida this weekend. I'm going Florida to win it all.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I do think Wake Forest is the heavy favorite, and they haven't done anything to dissuade me from that. I'll tell you the team that I think could win it all, and nobody's talking about him. I think Oral Roberts could win this whole thing.
Really?
I do.
Really?
Man. Like I
do like that Denton kid. I got to tell you that. I'm a big fan of the Denton kid.
That Cade Denton kid is probably a top, 2, 3, 4th round arm. They've got another kid named Jacob Widener who's going to be like the Chris Sale from the left side that Oregon will probably get on Saturday or something.
Can't see the ball.
Pick the ball up. They've got 2 bats that can really move things along. I mean, that Oral Roberts team looks really good, and they have Oregon in the first super here. I think they're going to take care of Oregon handedly, if I'm being honest with you. Then they'll have either TCU or Indiana State. I think they match up really well against those guys. But then it's, to your point, it could be Oral Roberts against Florida, which I think would be, I think that would be great. Oral Roberts for me is one of the top 4 teams left.
That's
I
fun.
would go, and this is how I would rank them. Yeah.
I was just going to say, if Oral Roberts wins, this is
Florida.
Coastal Carolina all over again, isn't it? I mean,
Yep. Nobody watches them. Nobody's seen Oral Roberts play all season, and then you see these kids chucking 95, 96 with crazy arm angles and like 18 inches of run and 87 mile an hour sliders, and you're like, Jesus, what the
Denton comes at you.
Are they cooking kids in a lab?
Denton throws all his limbs at you at the same time. Like that is a crazy.
Denton looks like Jake Arrieta.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. So you're gonna give me your top 4. Is Oral Roberts 4 on that list?
It's a toss-up between Oral Roberts and LSU. I don't know if LSU has the pitching outside of Skeens or the bats outside of Tommy White and Dylan Cruz. Like, once you get through Tommy White and Dylan Cruz, like that LSU lineup, I think is a little overrated. So, yeah, I don't know who's going to come out of that LSU, Kentucky, Tennessee, Southern Miss.
Would you just
Southern Miss is nasty too. They've got 4 or 5 arms too.
Would you just walk Dylan Cruz then? that's actually true, like if that's what you believe, and that's actually true, and this weekend LSU is playing Kentucky, you don't think you can, like it if the bases
not
are
with Tommy
empty,
White behind him.
If the bases are empty, you just walk down. You don't. Okay. What about Tommy White? If the bases are empty, do you just walk Tommy White then, or you just attack him?
Yeah,
because the bases are empty?
I would. Yeah, if you just got Dylan Cruz out and there's now 2 outs with nobody on, I would walk Tommy White.
Wow.
You know, because the way those teams like LSU bludgeon you is they put up a 6th spot. So there's not a lot of LSU puts 1 on the board with 1 solo home run from Cade Beloso. Like there's not a lot of that going on in these games. I think Kentucky's going to get boat raced by LSU, but I think Southern Miss could give LSU a really tough time.
Interesting. That'll be fun. College baseball, one of the more underrated
it's sick.
Sports. It's so good. It's good in February, and it's great in May and June. That's the voice of Joe Doyle. Follow him on Twitter at Joe Doyle MILB, and obviously get his stuff, his rankings, his mock drafts at futurestarseries.com. Joe, always fun doing this. Go watch some baseball, will you?
Oh yeah, okay. If I have to,
it's an order. I mean that comes straight from the top. We've been told we got to go watch a bunch of baseball, so that's what we're gonna do. That's all for us this week. We'll talk next week. This has been the FSS Plus podcast.
So just chill till the next episode.